Drop the name of your city in the comments below, and stay with me all the way to the end, because I promise you, by the time this story is over, you'll understand exactly what I mean when I say that some men don't need to be fixed. They just need to be left alone long enough to fix themselves. The morning Lydia Voss arrived in Harrowfield, Montana, the sky was the color of an old bruise, purple and yellow and mean-looking at the edges. She stepped off the stage with one trunk, one carpet bag, and a letter of employment folded in the breast pocket of her coat. She had not come looking for a husband. She had come looking for work. That distinction matters, remember it. The letter was from a man named Griff Harlan, rancher, widower, owner of the Greystone spread that sat 12 miles east of town. He needed someone to take over the household. His previous housekeeper had left without notice in October, and winter was coming fast off the divide. The advertisement had been brief and oddly formal. Capable woman needed. No nonsense preferred. Lydia had read it 3 times and decided that no nonsense preferred was the most honest thing a man had ever put in print. She was 28 years old. She had been a schoolteacher in Abilene for 4 years before the school closed. Before that, she had kept house for her ailing father until he passed. She knew how to be useful. She had, over time, become so good at being useful that she had nearly forgotten how to be anything else. The wagon that came to collect her was driven by a boy named Perry, 16, gap-toothed, clearly under strict orders to say as little as possible. He loaded her trunk without ceremony, told her the road would be rough, and delivered both facts about equally. "Is Mr. Harlan a fair employer?" she asked, somewhere past the 2nd mile. Perry thought about it. "He's quiet," he said finally. "That's not what I asked." "No," Perry agreed. "It ain't." He didn't say anything else until they reached the gate. Griff Harlan was standing at the fence line when they pulled up, mending wire in the gray afternoon light. He didn't stop working when the wagon came through. He finished the section he was on, set down his pliers, and walked over at his own pace, not rushed, not rude, just indifferent to the idea that someone might be waiting. He was taller than she'd expected. Broader, too. He had the kind of face that had been weathered into something almost severe, deep-set eyes, a jaw like a shelf of rock, lines around his mouth that hadn't come from smiling. He wore his hat low. He looked at her the way a man looks at a new piece of equipment he's not sure will hold up under pressure. "Miss Voss," he said. "Mr. Harlan." He nodded at her trunk. "Perry'll bring that in. Kitchen's through the back. You'll find it in whatever state it's in. I don't have time to apologize for it." "I didn't ask for an apology," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Something shifted slightly in his expression. Not enough to call it a reaction, but enough that she noticed. "No," he said. "You didn't." He walked back to the fence. The kitchen was, in fact, a disaster. Not dirty. He was not a dirty man, but neglected in the specific way of a place where someone has been surviving rather than living. The pantry was half-stocked with canned goods stacked in no order. The wood box was low. There were 3 mugs on the shelf, and 2 of them were cracked. She stood in the middle of it for a moment, taking inventory, and then she rolled up her sleeves and began. She didn't ask where things were. She found them. She didn't ask what he liked to eat. She made something reasonable: salt pork, roasted root vegetables, cornbread from a starter she found in the cold room, and she put it on the table at 6 o'clock without announcement. He came in, washed his hands at the pump, sat down, and ate without comment. She ate at the other end of the table, because she was not a servant, and she would not eat standing up in a corner. If that was a problem, better to establish it now. He didn't say a word about it. He ate, he refilled his own coffee, and he left the table without looking at her. But he cleared his own plate to the basin. She noticed that. The first week passed in a kind of armed quiet. Griff Harlan ran his ranch with the efficiency of a man who had long ago decided that other people were mostly a complication. He had 2 hired hands, Perry and an older man called Doyle, who worked the cattle, and he coordinated both of them with the fewest possible words. He rose before light. He returned at dark. He ate what was on the table. He said thank you exactly once on the 4th day, when she brought coffee out to him in the barn during a difficult calving. He said it without looking at her. She didn't say you're welcome, because he was already turned back toward the animal. She wasn't sure if he was rude or just alone in a way that had calcified over time. She filed that question away and kept working. She found a rhythm quickly. Mornings she had mostly to herself. She made breakfast early, left his portion covered, and used the quiet hours to make the house something more than functional. She beat the rugs. She repaired a curtain rod. She organized the pantry so that a person could actually find things. Small adjustments, made without commentary. He noticed. She could tell he noticed because once or twice she caught him standing somewhere she had just reorganized, the woodshed, the supply room. Just standing there for a moment longer than necessary before moving on. He never mentioned it. She didn't need him to. There was a dog. She discovered this on day 3 when a large, half-wild-looking hound appeared on the porch and sat looking at her with a kind of dignified patience that she found respectable. "What's his name?" she asked Perry at lunch. "Don't know that he has one," Perry said. "Boss just calls him Dog." The dog, upon hearing this summary of his situation, blinked at her slowly. She started calling him August. He answered to it within 2 days. She didn't make a point of telling Griff Harlan this. But one evening she heard him from the other room say quietly, "Come on then, August." A pause. Then the sound of the dog's nails on the floor. She smiled at her mending and said nothing. It was Perry who told her, without meaning to, what had happened. They were mending fence together. She had asked to learn because the south pasture section kept going down, and she was tired of it being anyone else's problem. And Perry was explaining the splice and talking in the loose, easy way he sometimes got when he forgot to be reticent. "He was different before," Perry said. "Before what?" Perry pulled the wire taut. "Before his wife died. 3 years back, fever came on fast. He wasn't home, he'd gone to Billings for supplies and she was gone by the time he got back. He tied off the splice. After that he just kind of went inside himself, I guess. Stopped talking much. Stopped going to town. People tried to. His mother tried to set him up. His sister brought women out here a couple times. Prospective type women. He was just cold to all of them. Not mean. Just like talking to a wall." Lydia said nothing for a moment. She moved to the next post. "He was never mean to me," she said. Perry looked at her sideways. "No," he said carefully. "He weren't." She thought about that. She thought about it while she was hanging laundry in the cold afternoon air, watching her breath come out in clouds. She thought about what it must be to come home to an empty house after that. What it must do to a person over time. The silence, the absence, the way a house without someone in it starts to feel like a different thing entirely. She understood something about empty houses. Her father had taken sick slowly, over years, and she had watched what remained when a person declined, until they were only the shape of who they were. She knew how grief could make a person draw their borders in. She had drawn her own. She did not feel sorry for Griff Harlan. That distinction also matters. She recognized something in him that she understood, and understanding is a different thing from pity. She took in her laundry. She went back inside. She made supper. The storm came in the 3rd week of November, fast and total, the way Montana storms announce themselves. Without apology and without pause. By nightfall 3 feet of snow had fallen, and the wind was cracking the porch boards like artillery. Lydia kept the stove fed and boiled water for coffee, and waited. Griff Harlan didn't come back from the barn. By 9 o'clock she was not panicking. She was too practical for panic, but she was putting on her coat. She pulled on his extra pair of heavy gloves she found by the door, tied a rope to the porch rail, and walked into the white. He was in the barn with one of the mares who had gone into early labor, crouching in the straw, sleeves rolled to the elbow in the cold. He looked up when the door opened, and for a moment something crossed his face. Something fast that she couldn't quite name. "You don't need to be out here," he said. "I know," she said. "I brought coffee." She set the pot on the small shelf near the heat lamp. She sat down on a hay bale and waited. He delivered the foal, a small brown thing that arrived into the world with a kind of bewildered determination. And he rubbed it down with straw, checked the mare, and then sat back on his heels. He was exhausted. She could see it in the set of his shoulders. The way a person looks when they've been holding themselves up through sheer will and have just run out of reasons to pretend otherwise. She poured him a cup of coffee and held it out. He took it. His hand brushed hers in the taking. Just for a moment, unavoidable, accidental, and neither of them said anything about it. They sat in the barn while the storm howled outside and the foal figured out its legs, and August, who had followed her out and apparently decided this was his business now, settled his large head on her boot. "You could have stayed inside," Griff said. Not a reprimand. Something closer to confusion. "So could you," she said. He looked at her over the rim of his mug. "I couldn't," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why I came out." He didn't say anything for a while. Outside, a shutter was banging somewhere. The wind found every gap in the boards and announced itself through each one. "My wife's name was Helen," he said. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the foal. She would have been out here too. First storm of the year, she always wanted to check the barn herself. He paused. I used to tell her it was unnecessary. Lydia waited. I was wrong about that, he said quietly. She didn't say I'm sorry. She didn't say she sounds wonderful. She said, what color was her hair? He blinked. Looked at her like she'd said something unexpected. Brown, he said. Same color as the foal, almost. Lydia looked at the foal. Then she picked a good night to come and check on things, she said. He stared at her. Then something happened to his face that she didn't think had happened in a long time. Not quite a smile, more like the memory of one, the outline of it. He looked back at the foal. Yeah, he said, I suppose she did. After the storm, things were different. Not loudly different. Nothing was announced. But the temperature between them shifted by some unmarked degree. The way a room changes when someone opens a window. Nothing dramatic, just more air. He started saying things. Small things. Observations, mostly, about the weather, about the cattle, about something Perry had done that was inadvertently hilarious. He said them in passing, without preamble, in the way of a man who wasn't used to conversation but was remembering that it was allowed. She responded in kind. She didn't ask questions that were too large. She didn't try to draw him out. She simply answered when he spoke, and let silence be silence when it wanted to be. There was an evening in December. She was at the table with her mending. He was sharpening a knife by the fire, August asleep between them, when she looked up and realized that this was, in its own specific way, a life. Not the one she had planned. Not the one she had imagined at any point in her 28 years on Earth. But a real one, with warmth in the stove and work she knew how to do and a dog with a name. She went back to her mending. She did not examine the feeling further. Not then. His mother came in December, right before Christmas, in a hired buggy from Billings. Her name was Cora Harlan, and she was a small, sharp-eyed woman who took inventory of Lydia in about 4 seconds and then smiled in a way that was somehow both welcoming and extremely strategic. So you're the one who's got him talking again, she said, over coffee at the kitchen table. He was talking before I got here, Lydia said evenly. Not like this. Cora wrapped both hands around her mug. I called on him in September. He said 11 words to me the entire visit. I counted. She tilted her head. He's not unhappy. That's new. Lydia said carefully, I'm his housekeeper, Mrs. Harlan. Cora's eyes were bright. Yes, she said pleasantly. That's what I said you were too. Lydia decided that this woman was someone she would either love deeply or find absolutely exhausting, and quite possibly both at once. Griff seemed faintly mortified by his mother's visit, in the way of a man who knows he's being observed more closely than he would prefer. He was stiffer than usual for the first day, too deliberate in not looking at Lydia in front of Cora, which was itself, she thought, a kind of looking. On the second evening, Cora asked Lydia to walk with her to the south fence to see the view at dusk, the mountains going pink, the snowfields turning lavender, and she said, without segue, he put Helen's photograph away, did you know that? Last month, he told me himself. Lydia looked at the mountains. I didn't know that, she said. He's not over her, Cora said. I don't think a man like him gets over something like that entirely, but there's a difference between holding on to grief and building your house inside of it. She paused. He's been building for 3 years. That room's gotten very small. Lydia said nothing. You don't have to say anything, Cora said. I'm not asking you to. I just thought you ought to know. They walked back in the cold, their breath rising in twin columns, and Lydia thought about what it meant to build a house inside of grief. She had lived in a smaller version of the same structure. She recognized the architecture. January came brutal and steady. They fell into rhythms that were more shared now, not arranged, just arrived at the way water finds its level. He fixed the loose hinge on the pantry door without her asking. She started keeping a pot of coffee hot at the times she'd noticed he came in from the barn. He checked the woodbox without being told. She learned which horses he worried about and made a point to ask. Perry noticed. He was young, but he wasn't oblivious. You're good for him, he said one afternoon carefully. I'm good at my job, she said. Perry nodded with the diplomatic restraint of a boy who knows enough to let something lie. It was February when it happened. She wouldn't have called it a scene. She would have called it a Tuesday. She had slipped on the ice at the well. Not fallen, just caught herself on the edge in time. And she was standing there getting her breath back when he came around the corner and saw her. He crossed the yard in about 4 strides and took her arm, and then both arms, checking her face, her hands, the way a person checks when they're scared. I'm fine, she said. He didn't let go immediately. His hands were on her arms, and he was looking at her, really looking at her, not the careful sideways glances he'd given her for months. but directly, with something in his expression that was too large and too specific to be just concern for an employee. "Lydia," he said. "Griff," she said back, which was the first time she had used his name. He heard it. She could tell he heard it by the slight change in his face, the way his grip on her arms adjusted. Not loosening, just shifting, from steadying to something else. "I can't," he started, and then stopped. "I know," she said. "I don't know how to." "I know that too." He looked at her for a long moment in the cold morning air, the well behind her, August sitting a polite distance away, pretending not to watch. "I'm not asking you for anything," she said quietly. "I never have." "I know," he said. He swallowed. "That's the problem." She blinked. He let go of her arms. He took one step back, like a man who has made a decision and is not entirely sure it was the right one. And then he said, like each word was something he was lifting, "I would like it very much if you stayed. Not as my housekeeper. I mean past spring. I mean as." He stopped, jaw tight. "I mean for good if you'd want that, if you'd consider." She looked at him. The man who had said 11 words to his mother in September. The man who had called a dog for 3 years. The man who had sat in the barn in a blizzard and told her, sideways and unpracticed, about a woman named Helen and a color of hair. "I would consider it," she said. He exhaled. It was not a dramatic exhale. It was the exhale of a man who has been holding something for a very long time and has finally set it down. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. He nodded once. He went back to what he'd been doing, but when he walked past her, his hand found hers for just a moment. Brief, deliberate, warm in the cold, and then he let go and kept walking. She stood at the well for a moment. Then she went inside. They were married in April, in town, in the small church with the crooked steeple that had been crooked for 30 years, and no one had gotten around to fixing. Cora cried. Perry looked like he was trying not to. August sat outside the door and howled once during the vows, which the minister chose to interpret as a blessing. Griff stood beside her at the altar, and when the minister asked him to take her hand, he took it and held it. Not loosely, not formally. He held it the way you hold something you have decided to keep. When it was over and they were standing in the cold spring air, Cora wrapped Lydia in both arms and held on for a moment and then said, in her ear, "He smiled at you 3 times before the ceremony even started. I counted those too." The ranch in May was a different thing from the ranch in November. The snow came off the mountains in sheets of cold water that turned the south pasture green in a way that seemed almost excessive, almost too much color after all that white. The foal, the small brown one from the storm, had grown into something gangly and ridiculous and full of opinions, and he made Griff laugh once, genuinely, while Lydia was standing near enough to hear it. She kept her eyes on what she was doing. But she was smiling. There were mornings now when she woke in the gray before light and heard him already moving in the kitchen, and she would lie there for a moment, listening to the sounds of a man who knew where everything was, because she had put it all there. The rattle of the stoveplate, the hiss of water on heat, then quiet, and then, always, his step at the door, light, checking on something, and then back. She never told him she heard it. She didn't need to. In June, she found the journal. It was not hidden. It was on the shelf in the front room, between a surveying manual and a broken clock, a plain brown notebook with no writing on the outside. She wouldn't have touched it, but it fell when she was dusting and fell open. His handwriting was small and very precise. March 14. Lydia reorganized the supply room again. "I can find everything now. I had not realized what a thing that was." March 22. She named the dog August. Don't know how he answered to it before I did. April 3 asked her to stay. She said she'd consider it. Slept better than I have in 3 years. She closed the journal carefully. She put it back exactly where it had been. She went back to the kitchen. She did not say anything about it. But that evening, when he came in from the north pasture and sat down at the table and looked at her across the supper dishes, with that particular way he had now of looking at her, like she was something he was still not entirely used to having and didn't want to risk by taking for granted. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. He turned his hand over and held hers. Just that. Outside, the sky was going gold over the divide, the mountains doing that thing they did in June, when the light caught the snowfields at the right angle and turned them something impossible. August was on the porch. The foal was in the south pasture hollering at nothing. She did not know exactly what happiness was supposed to feel like. She had read descriptions of it, over the years, and most of them sounded like something that happened to other people. But this, The warmth of his hand, the sound of the dog on the boards, the smell of supper and pine and that particular Montana summer evening air, this was something she could not find a better word for. So she kept that one,